It's been interesting watching your presentations because we've been working on sustainable economic performance measures from a very different perspective. It's been top-down and policy-driven. It was brought about by some legislation that was passed in 2007, Nova Scotia's Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act, and it was informed by our economic development strategy that was passed in 2006, and also the social prosperity framework. I'll explain that just a bit. Opportunities for sustainable prosperity, excuse me, is it's an updated economic growth strategy for Nova Scotia, and it's based on the 5 capitals plus 3 priorities: business climate, productivity through innovation, trade, and competitiveness. And this was a very innovative piece of policy legislation when it came out, and it's also been highly successful. It's been working through cross-departmental collaboration and breaking down some of the silos that we worked with for years. The social prosperity framework is basically built on the same concept of building on the 5 capitals and 3 principles. This is the model that our famous model that we've used for years. The theory is that as we invest in and build up our capitals along the bottom of the triangle, it'll strengthen our internal capacity, our external capacity, and eventually feed into sustainable prosperity, which in turn will go back and help build up the capitals and presumably some kind of economic perpetual motion machine, maybe, if we're lucky. So, more likely, it just tells you where to pay attention. But and the Act that Respecting Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity. What's really interesting about this is it's passed unanimously by all the parties in the House, and you don't see that very often. So it means that the commitment is presumably there no matter who's in charge. It establishes 2 high-level objectives to strive for by 2020. One of them is to have the cleanest and most sustainable environments in the world, and economic performance equal to or better than the Canadian average. Right now we're kind of focused on coming up with performance measures for item number 2. It doesn't sound all that daunting, but when you look at Nova Scotia tends to rank around the bottom of the provincial GDP. We're about 9th right now. So it was pretty clear to us that just focusing solely on the GDP wasn't going to get us to where we wanted to be by 2020. We needed to look at some of the things that that would lead us in that direction. So this is our task as put forward in the legislation. The EGSPA Senior Officials Group delegated a working group to come up with a set of measures to meet the requirements. It's composed of members from finance, economic and rural development, environment, and energy, and to say it's mostly economists, policy analysts. It couldn't be a more pointy-headed group if you went out and tried. And there's an EGSPA roundtable made up of members from the business and environmental NGO community, and they get to monitor our progress towards the goals that are set out in EGSPA, and they would review whatever we came up with. So when we considered what economic performance meant, we looked at, we came up with a modified version of the Brundtland Declaration. And this allows us to view our traditional economic performance measures, such as GDP, in the context of all 5 capitals. I should put out now, because we actually like to modify every definition we come across. I don't know why that is. Adaptive. We're very creative people. So our measurement framework, we decided to use the 5 capitals of domains, and the headline measures for each capital to provide a broader, theoretically coherent picture of what's happening in our economy and society, rather than relying on just the traditional economic output measures like GDP. And we were also very excited. This is an opportunity to start educating people, to get people to think about the 5 capitals and their role in the economy. And I know this seems really obvious now, but it took us a long time to get there. We actually worked with a group of MPA students from Dalhousie who we had asked them to explore looking at all the 8 priorities from the economic framework, and as they were working on that, they had lots of great ideas, but it became pretty apparent that that was unwieldy. And I shall say, like, every time we would come up with a solution, Krista Roost would send an email with a paper attached telling us how to do it. So we felt like we were doing it all ourselves, but somehow everybody else was getting the credit. So our first challenge, like I said, with the definitions, was to reconcile the perception of what was meant by capitals. And I say this because the document Opportunities for Sustainable Prosperity defined all the capitals from an economic perspective instead of just using the standard definitions of the capitals. And the social prosperity framework people went and did the same thing, so they had different definitions for all the capitals. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. Human capital. You can see that there's some issues here. I was with education when OFSP came out, and there was a lot of discomfort around a lot of these social areas with defining the concept of the capitals and what they interpreted as defining human beings as being capital. And to be honest, a lot of times people would talk about human capital and the workforce as being interchangeable, and they're two completely different concepts. So we came up, the blue definition is one that both senior officials groups finally agreed with. And again, you can see the same thing in financial capital. The original definitions, everyone had their perspective on it, and we had to bring it together and capture everybody's point of view. I drew this myself. One of the problems with the triangle diagram is all the capitals are exactly equal and lined up along the bottom. And having worked in economic development before and having studied the MBA, the traditional mental model is the exact reverse of this. You know, prosperity feeds into everything else. So we did like to bring it home to people that natural capital was the foundation of all the other capitals. And also wanted to, another perspective we encountered when we went out and talked to the different groups around government is that there was a firm belief among a lot of people that we had to measure absolutely everything. It had to be completely inclusive. We might need dozens or hundreds of indicators for each capital. So we're kind of trying to convey to people that everything is so interlinked. If we could just get a few key indicators, we could give a really good, high-level, 30,000-foot view of the economy. So when we get down to developing the actual indicator framework, for each capital we devised 3 questions. What do we have? What is it producing for us? Or how well are we using it? And is it sustainable? The third question, is it sustainable? It's an opportunity to include an indicator that might be an at-risk area or changing very quickly, or something that might have meaning for the average concerned citizen. And this is the fun part. This is where you get a bunch of intellectuals around a committee, is interpreting the framework. Like, what do the capitals represent? Are they assets? There's a point of view that they represent stocks and flows. We have others who say they just represent capacity, and which approach is more persuasive and informative. The stocks and flows approach ties in with the GPI Atlantic balance sheet approach concept. And I think you've heard John talk about that this morning. This concept is also supported by recommendations in the UN Economic Commission Committee report and the most recent UN report by Stiglitz, Sen, and Fitoussi. The capacity approach allows us to include productivity measures. And as you can kind of see with the reaction to the capitals, we might want to veer away from using an accounting-based language to present our results. Not everyone responds to it in the same way, or it might just depend on our audience. One thing we've discussed is coming up with different approaches for different audiences. But but when it comes down to push comes to shove, what do we have as levels, and what is it producing as rates? So it's not really that big a deal. I think everybody who's worked with indicators comes into this. We start with your ideal, the indicators that are available. They're easily compared across Canada and other provinces. They can show long-term trends, valid and reliable, make sense to the general public. The reality is there's not a lot of data that meets that ideal. It's not usually updated every year. If there is, there could be a 2 to 5 year lag or more. It's often collected, especially environmental data, tends to be collected at the provincial level, and you know, it's hard. It's hard to find and collate. And again, it might be difficult for the layperson to interpret. So one strategy is to stick what's available and familiar, even if it's not a perfect fit. There's pros: the obtainability, ease of interpretation, credibility. The cons, as the availability of data for all the capitals isn't the same, so you might be able to describe some capitals really well and really up to date, and other ones might have poor information. Another thing is good data isn't necessarily tell you what you need to know. The other strategy is to develop composites, indices, search out and compile really used data. We've tried this a little bit. It's really challenging, and like most groups working on indicators, we have a budget of $0. So everybody just tries to do what they can off their desk, and then you have an issue where people don't know how to interpret it, or it doesn't have a lot of credibility with them. But my hope is that we will just use these measures, and we'll annoy people enough that they'll start talking about it when they see what we're trying to do. They may realize they have access to better information, provide better ideas, let us know what they want to see measured. There are experts currently working on a lot of these indicators, and more indicators should emerge. Like I said, we might hope annoy people so much they'll come up with something better just to make us go away. And we can get feedback too on what conceptual models work and how to better present the results. And now, this is a kind of an early version that we've been working with just to kind of capture the ranks, the trends. It's very messy, and this is actually a short version of it. We really have a lot of work to do, and it's hard to come up with a really good visual way to capture what we would like to see. But one thing we've done is we've used color coding to try and identify which capitals are concerned and which ones seem to be doing fairly well. So the next step, it seems like, again, the total opposite of what they did in Winnipeg or anywhere else, is to try to get feedback. We're looking at opportunities for online feedback. One of the concerns is that you can put the comment box up on a website, but it doesn't necessarily mean that anybody's going to come. We might want to look too at getting different approaches to targeting data. One thing that we did do with another group of Tallahassee students, we're very good at using student labor, is developed a workshop that helps people go through a stage where they envision sustainable prosperity, get an overview of the 5 capitals, and are able to provide feedback on the indicators, both the format and the indicators themselves. It's based on picture cards, as you can see there, so it's actually kind of fun to do. People seem to enjoy working with it. And by the time they got to the point where they provided feedback, they felt like they had a good sense of the 5 capitals and had been given a chance to think of what was important to them. So we did a pilot with the students. It was well received, and we might do a version of this with some key groups. Like I said, dealing with what we've noted in dealing with our staff is that there's generally a limited understanding of the 5 capitals, a tendency to confuse green and sustainable, a tendency to silo thinking. People will adopt a capital as their capital, and they'll just mentally ignore everything else. And this might actually be exacerbated by the fact that some of the strategies are based on the capitals. People see them as a form of performance measure, which they're not intended to be. So right now, like I said, we've got the report card format. We're allowing for feedback. We're committed to longer annual reports now, which will allow us to discuss things in more depth. This wasn't initially seen as being important, but I think you really can't just have a one-page thing that describes the economy. The next steps, interim indicators are still to be reviewed by the deputies in the Expo Roundtable, and we're looking at ways to generate interest and feedback, because the key thing is to get people involved and have them understand what's going on. We found from experience if you just go out and say what's important to you, you don't really get good feedback. And I leave you with this quote, "Perfection is attained by slow degrees. It requires the hand of time."